What is good, Mexit planners, and Happy New Year. Usually when folks hear that I live in Mexico, the first and second questions that they ask are why Mexico and why Merida? These questions are asked by Mexicans and expats alike. Even folks that know us from Atlanta ask these questions. Well, today I'm going to share with you our whys. Let's get it. Why do we move to Mexico and specifically Merida? For starters, our dream was to live abroad when our older kids were established and out of the house. We've been married for 28 years this past December, and we started our family in our early 20s. Our oldest daughter just graduated from college this past December. Our oldest three kids are young adults and living life on their terms. We knew that we were going to be empty nesters by the age of 45, or so we thought. I was 23 when we had our oldest son, so the idea of traveling or living out of the country was born when we were in our early 20s, dreaming of what life would be like in our 40s. But to the question as to why Mexico, it came down to several factors. Over the last 15 years, starting with my wife traveling abroad with our oldest kids to Guadalajara for a study abroad trip, we fell in love with Mexico, its people, and the culture. My wife and my older kids got to live with a family in Guadalajara who adopted us as their own. We've been connected ever since. But this family's compassion and sincere love really endeared us to Mexico. My wife and kids were the first family that they ever hosted in this study abroad program. During their stay, I got a chance to travel to Guadalajara to see for myself what real Mexico was like. And to my surprise, it was nothing like the negative stereotype that I'd seen in the US media. Because of the negative media coverage that I'd seen in the US, I was very reluctant to agree to let my wife take the kids with her to Mexico. However, God has a way of opening doors. And my sister, who was also studying at the university that my wife went to and minoring in Spanish, also got a chance to go on this trip. So on this trip, we met our adopted little sister, Bimo, gained a new family in Guadalajara, and got a huge appreciation for real Mexican culture. I'm glad I didn't let fear control my decision making, because that trip literally changed the trajectory of our lives. After the initial study abroad trip to Guadalajara over about a 10-year period, my wife traveled with our kids to Guadalajara for about a month every summer. It was during these trips that we got really comfortable with the thought of living in Mexico. During these trips, I was able to visit for like 1 to 2 weeks and to experience life here in Mexico. Now fast forward to 2015. And we decided to have another little one. We planned to bring her along for this amazing new adventure. Our boys graduated high school at the same time in 2016. And that same year, our little bug was born about a week after graduation. And our oldest daughter was going to finish high school in just 3 years. This is when the plan really started to be put in place. Initially, we considered the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. However, Mexico won because of our familiarity with Guadalajara. Guadalajara was our initial area of focus because it was a large city with great climate. It also had all of the services that we wanted and needed. However, as we began to investigate more, we realized that the security situation in Guadalajara had changed over the last few years. What we loved about Guadalajara was the climate and the available services because it's such a large city. We also thought Guadalajara would be an easier transition because of our familiarity with Tlaquepaque and the city of Guadalajara. In the Creating Your Mexit Plans course, the first lesson is understanding your whys and how to use that information to overcome the obstacles that you will face. Because moving to a new country is anything but easy. Check out the course in the link above and the description notes below. Now back to the story. Ultimately, we didn't choose Guadalajara because of the change in security of the city. We also wanted to be a little bit closer to the East Coast because the timeline for our Mexit was during the freshman year of our oldest daughter. So we wanted to be able to get back quickly if we needed to. So the second part of this question is why Merida? As it turns out, our small group in our church was planning a mission trip to Mexico. The mission was going to be based out of Merida and working with a small church in Dizentune. We had been looking in the Yucatan Peninsula, but in Quintana Roo, in areas like Puerto Morelos, Acamal, and others around the Caribbean coast. Been to Merida about 17 years before on a Carnival cruise where we did a city tour excursion. We had a great time, but didn't really consider Merida as a spot until this mission trip. Fast forward to 2018 to the mission trip. During that mission trip, we spent most of our time off in the small town of Dizentune. but we were able to get a feel for how nice the people are, the deep Mayan culture, and a sense of the food here in the Yucatan. Incidentally, we were here the week they opened the Texas Roadhouse in 2018, and the Harbor Mall was still under construction at that time. This was our first inkling that Merida really could be a viable location. It had all the services that we needed, plus it had an X factor with it being so close to the beach. In 2019, we returned for our second mission trip to work with the local church and school in Motul. On the end of that mission trip, we actually extended our stay so that we can do a real exploratory trip here in Merida. This time we stayed in the Airbnb, we rented a car, and we got a chance to really drive around and explore the city. One night while driving around, we stumbled upon the Montes de Ami area behind Boston's. And this is when we noticed the wealth that exists in Merida, and we also learned that it's the safest city in Mexico. Having experienced the city a bit more on this second exploratory trip, we set our sights on Merida as being our initial landing spot. So in June of 2019, I came to Merida for 3 weeks to study Spanish and to make sure that I could make it here without my Spanish-speaking wife. She and our little bug came down for a week during the middle of that trip. And this is when we found our first long-term rental for our eventual move in 2019. Just a note, we didn't rent anything, but we located the property and talked to the owner. We also met with some of the expats in the city, and it was during this time that we met the person that would introduce us to our eventual friend group. I like to think that Merida chose us as much as we chose Merida. We were called here to help, but in the process, we discovered what would become our eventual home. What's even crazier, I can remember saying to myself when we first visited the city center shopping mall on our first mission trip that I could see myself living in an area like this. Well, today I live less than 2 miles from the city center shopping mall in the north part of Merida. I firmly believe that God will allow you to see your place many times before you know what you're seeing and why. Now that you've heard our whys, what's yours? Feel free to drop me comments in the section below. Until next time, MexitPlans Monty, I'm out.